I'm Isabella Stone, 31 years old. This past Christmas, I sat alone in my Chicago apartment eating leftover pasta, thinking my family was too broke for a gathering. I had prepared for a simple, solitary holiday, believing my loved ones were struggling financially. The evening took a strange turn when I casually opened Instagram, a common habit. My quiet night was abruptly shattered. I stumbled upon a live stream from my younger sister, Charlotte. The video showed a party, vibrant and loud, unfolding right inside my parents' house. The same house my father had described as too modest, too expensive to heat for a family gathering this year. It was packed with guests, music, and decorations I hadn't seen in years. Everyone was there except me. The scene was a stark, jarring contrast to the narrative of hardship my family had presented. This wasn't a small, quiet family dinner. This was a grand celebration, a festive explosion of light and sound. The sudden, gut-wrenching realization that I had been deliberately excluded and misled about my family's true financial state was deeply unsettling. The party, I now understood, was funded by my own generosity, a cruel irony. It was a public, undeniable display of their deception. The broadcast ended with my father raising a glass, toasting to the best Christmas ever, while, to my horror, my name became the punchline of their private joke. This moment, raw and painful, made me stop simply wondering if they cared. Instead, it became terrifyingly clear just how long they'd been using me, how deeply entrenched their exploitation truly was. I grew up just outside of Milwaukee in a small beige house that always looked a little tired. My father, Leonard, was a real estate agent who could sell a dream to a stranger but never kept a steady paycheck. My mother, Sharon, worked part-time at the local elementary school, mostly covering for Leonard's gambling and bad luck. My younger sister, Charlotte, took after my father, quick to spend, slow to plan. I, however, was the odd one out. I saved my birthday money, mowed lawns in the summer, and took every babysitting job I could find. I worked the register at the grocery store through high school, skipped parties, and kept a spreadsheet of my savings. By the time I left for college, I had enough for my first semester and a work-study job lined up. After graduation, I moved to Chicago and started in marketing. Long hours, tight deadlines, but I found my way. By 30, I was managing big accounts, making six figures, and living in a tidy condo. My bills were paid. I had a small balcony with a view of the lake and a 401k. I didn't need to check every week. It was a life I built piece by piece, through careful planning and hard work. My family's life moved differently. Leonard's sure things always came up short. Sharon took out loans to cover credit cards. Charlotte dropped out of school and bounced from one boutique job to the next, always needing help with rent, gas, or just a little extra to make it through the month. The money requests started during my last year of college. First a few hundred, then thousands. Leonard claimed it was for a property lead. Sharon needed help with a car repair. Charlotte had an emergency with a roommate. I started sending money regularly, thinking it was temporary. It never was. By the time I turned 25, I was their backup plan. By 28, I was their safety net. Every Christmas and Thanksgiving, I flew home with gifts, groceries, and enough cash to patch the holes in their lives. I made restaurant reservations, paid for repairs, and kept quiet when they bought things they couldn't afford. It was odd how my family always seemed to find themselves in a bind, yet never truly changed their habits. It seemed almost as if they were comfortable in their dependency, relying solely on my hard-earned money. The situation culminated when I decided to set boundaries. In February, I sat them down on a video call and told them I couldn't keep footing the bills. "I'll help in an emergency," I said, "but I can't be the family bank." Leonard blinked like I'd spoken a foreign language. Sharon got teary. Charlotte rolled her eyes. "You don't even have fun with your money," Charlotte said. "Why not help us?" I hoped things would change. I wanted them to understand I wasn't turning my back. I just needed to stop sinking while pulling them up. When I mentioned keeping Christmas simple this year, Sharon said she understood. "Times are tough all over," she told me. I believed her. I even felt relieved, thinking perhaps a new chapter had begun. 13 days before Christmas, a group text came through. Leonard said they were canceling the gathering. Too broke this year. Sharon added how sorry they were. Charlotte claimed she was literally crying. I offered to bring food, gifts, something small. Leonard shut it down. "We're not taking handouts," he said. That was when something started to feel off. I didn't know it yet, but while I was preparing to spend Christmas alone, they were getting ready to throw the biggest holiday party I'd ever seen. Christmas Eve arrived. I had no plans. I picked up small gifts for my parents and Charlotte anyway, nothing elaborate. A leather folio for Leonard, a scarf in Sharon's favorite shade of teal, a cosmetic gift card for Charlotte. I even packed a cooler with some prepared food, thinking I could at least drop something off. When I texted to say I was an hour away, they all claimed they weren't home. Leonard said he had a last-minute showing. Sharon was picking up a prescription, and Charlotte said she picked up an extra shift. But their location pins told another story. All three were at the house. I sat in my car at a gas station for nearly 15 minutes, watching those little icons on the family app stay stubbornly still. They weren't moving. They weren't out. They just didn't want me there. I drove back to Chicago without saying anything. That night, I curled up on the couch in my flannel pajamas, the tree lights blinking softly in the corner. I'd turned down my best friend Amelia's invitation to join her family, thinking my parents had canceled Christmas out of necessity. I heated another cup of tea, then opened Instagram out of habit. Charlotte was live. That alone was unusual. She preferred staged selfies. I tapped the video without thinking. Charlotte was laughing, glasses clinking, music blaring in the background. "This is what happens when you plan the best Christmas party ever," Charlotte shouted, flipping the camera around. My parents' house was completely transformed. Garland wrapped the banisters, twinkling lights lined the ceiling, and a towering tree filled the living room. Tables were lined with silver platters. An ice sculpture shimmered in the background, and a DJ stood in the corner, adjusting sound levels like it was a wedding reception. People were everywhere. My aunts, uncles, cousins, neighbors I hadn't seen since high school. Even my cousin Teresa, who supposedly couldn't afford a flight, hugged Charlotte in the middle of the video. "Worth every penny," Charlotte squealed. Sharon appeared in a red velvet dress I had never seen before. Her hair was freshly dyed, not a hint of gray. Leonard stood beside her in a crisp button-down, glass raised high. "Merry Christmas, everybody!" he bellowed into the phone. "Best party of the year! Everyone's here!" Sharon called out. Everyone. I stared at the screen. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. Not at first. Charlotte danced into view again, holding her phone out toward a group of her friends. One of them leaned in and shouted, "Girl, how did you afford all this?" Charlotte smirked, placed a finger to her lips, and whispered, "Don't tell my sister." "She thinks we're broke." They laughed. Leonard popped into the frame behind her. "To Isabella," he toasted, working too hard to notice what her family's up to. They clinked glasses. The room erupted in cheers. I froze the video and took a screenshot, then another. I watched in silence as the camera panned across catered dishes, brand new furniture, trays of desserts, and faces full of laughter. I'd spent the day believing they were struggling. I sat alone in a quiet apartment while they toasted each other under lights I paid for. My phone sat on the coffee table, screen glowing. I reached for it again and opened my banking app. $2,500 to my parents on December 1st. Another $2,000 mid-month, marked as property tax. Charlotte had gotten $200 on the 19th for what she called a heating repair. The numbers didn't tell the whole story, but they didn't lie. I scrolled through Charlotte's feed. 3 days ago, a holiday manicure with a caption about self-care. 2 days ago, shopping bags from a high-end store. The day before Christmas, a selfie in a salon chair. Big night ahead. No mention of extra shifts, no sign of hardship. Sharon had posted a photo of a wrapped tower of gifts. Leonard had checked in at a liquor store known for its top-shelf selection. I returned to the group message from earlier in the month. Too broke for a big gathering, they said. Better to save our dignity. Maybe next year. I read every word again, slower this time. Each message was measured, each phrase carefully chosen. They hadn't canceled Christmas. They had canceled me. I closed the app. I didn't cry. I sat there, still. The only movement in the room was the blinking of the lights on the tree. The pasta I'd eaten hours ago sat heavy in my stomach. I opened a notebook from the side table and started writing down dates, transactions, quotes from the texts. Screenshots went into a folder on my desktop. I labeled each one December 1st transfer, December 12th message, December 24th video. At some point, the movie ended. The tea went cold. The clock said 11:43 p.m. I stood at the window and looked out over the city. Snow was falling again. The world felt quieter than usual. That night, as Christmas officially began, I, Isabella Stone, made a decision. No more money, no more pretending, no more silence. What I didn't know yet was how fast the fallout would come. But I was done waiting to be invited. I didn't sleep that night, not really. I dozed off sometime after midnight, still dressed, the tree lights blinking across the room in quiet rhythm. I woke before 6 with my mouth dry and a heavy stillness in my chest. Outside, the sun was just starting to rise, catching the snow on the rooftops across the street. I got up, made coffee, and stood by the window, watching the sidewalk fill slowly with bundled-up dog walkers and early risers. Christmas morning, no plans, no calls, no family. My phone buzzed at 7:08 a.m. A text from my father. Merry Christmas, Isabella. Hope you're doing something nice for yourself today. Quick question. Can you send the $3,800 for January rent? Property management company wants it early this year because of the holiday? I stood there with the cup in my hand, heat pressing against my fingers. It was Christmas morning, not a word about the night before. No mention of the party, no apology. Just another ask. I sat down at the kitchen table, opened the message again, and typed out one short sentence. Lose my number. I don't fund liars. Then I blocked his contact. After that, it was like flipping a switch. I went through my contacts one by one. Sharon, Charlotte, extended relatives who had been at the party, family friends who always seemed to be in the loop. I blocked them all. I logged into my banking app and canceled every recurring transfer, removed their names from the accounts, changed every password, set fraud alerts. I even emailed my financial advisor asking for an emergency meeting. It didn't matter that it was Christmas. I needed to protect what I'd built. It took me almost 2 hours to clean it all up. When I finished, my coffee was cold, but my hands were steady. I took a long shower, dressed in clean clothes, ate breakfast at my own pace. No rush, no calls, no interruptions. By late morning, my phone lit up again. Dozens of new numbers, messages from cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, payment requests through Venmo and Cash App, notes like, "Don't be childish." "Family helps family, and your mom is worried sick." A voicemail from an unknown number came in around noon. It was my mother's voice, soft, almost whispering. "Isabella, please call us." No apology, no explanation, just panic. I didn't call back. I didn't respond. I turned off my phone completely and left it on the counter. That night, I made dinner from scratch. I watched a movie I actually liked. I read a chapter from a book that had been sitting unopened on my nightstand for months. When I went to bed, I slept through the night without waking up once. The days that followed felt strange, like watching someone else's life from the outside. At work, I threw myself into year-end reports and campaign closeouts. I stayed late. I skipped the office happy hour. People noticed. My manager asked if everything was okay. Back home, the messages kept coming. New numbers, new email addresses, friends of friends trying to reach me. A woman I hadn't seen since middle school messaged me through LinkedIn saying she'd heard I was going through something. It was like they'd activated a network. On December 29th, I got a notification that a wire transfer had been attempted from one of my personal checking accounts, the one my parents used to know about. It didn't go through. The new security settings caught it, but still, they tried. I filed a police report. I told the officer it wasn't about pressing charges. I just needed documentation, something official. He looked uncomfortable when I explained everything, suggested mediation. I told him this wasn't a disagreement, it was exploitation. He nodded and finished the report. By New Year's Eve, the pressure had shifted. The tone of the messages was different now. Not angry, pleading, desperate. Mom's medicine, Charlotte's eviction notice, the power bill. I started seeing a therapist, doctor, Elias. He had kind eyes and a direct manner. I laid everything out in our first session. Years of bank transfers, the Christmas lie, the texts. The guilt. He listened quietly, took a few notes. Then he looked up and said, "What you're describing is financial abuse." It's often unrecognized when it happens within families, especially when children support their parents, but it's real. I nodded but didn't say anything. He added, "Family can be our greatest support or our deepest wound. The question is, what boundaries do you need to heal?" We scheduled weekly sessions after that. Every Wednesday night, I sat on that couch and spoke words I hadn't said out loud before. I also met with a lawyer, a referral from my advisor. She specialized in family financial issues, walked me through everything, including how to fully separate my credit, redirect mail, and freeze new account openings. I changed my phone number, opened a new email, set up a secure mailbox. January passed like that, quiet outside but not inside. Every time I checked my accounts, I saw one less link to my past. The last escalation came midway through the month. Charlotte showed up at my office building. Security called me from the front desk. "She says she's your sister," the guard said. "It's urgent." I didn't go down. I told them I wasn't accepting visitors. Charlotte left a note. Tom the doorman texted me a photo of it later that afternoon. "Isabella, don't know what your problem is, but you're being incredibly selfish right now. Mom and Dad can't make rent without you. You know they depend on you. Whatever you think we did, get over yourself and call us. This isn't funny." See double quote. I saved the photo, added it to the folder with the others. Then I made a quiet dinner, turned off my phone again, and went to bed early. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I just breathed. The day after Charlotte showed up at my office, I sat across from Dr. Elias again. The air outside was bitter Chicago in January, but his office was warm with the scent of peppermint tea drifting in from somewhere down the hall. I told him about the note, the tone of it, how Charlotte still wouldn't name what happened. He didn't say much at first, just listened, tapping his pen once on the side of his notebook. Then he asked one question. "What stopped you from replying?" I looked at the window behind him, frost feathering along the corners of the glass. "I think," I said slowly, "for the first time I realized I didn't owe them a response." We sat in that quiet for a while. Then I told him what I hadn't said out loud yet. "I feel better, lighter, and I also feel guilty for that." He nodded. "Of course you do. When a dynamic has been reinforced for years, breaking it can feel like betrayal, even when it's survival." I didn't respond, but I understood. Over the next few weeks, something began to shift. It didn't happen all at once, but it was there in small ways. I started cooking again, real meals, not just frozen leftovers. I reorganized my closet, pulled out clothes I hadn't worn in months, boxed up things I didn't need. I began walking home from work when the weather allowed, just to feel the air on my face. Every time I opened my banking app, I saw a balance that belonged entirely to me. The messages began to slow. Some trickled in from new numbers or email addresses, but nothing like before. I stopped checking the blocked folder. By mid-February, I'd started sleeping through the night again. I no longer flinched at unknown calls. I hadn't needed to make a single transfer since Christmas morning. Dr. Elias noticed the change before I said anything. "You seem more grounded today," he said as we started our session. "I think I am," I told him. I didn't know how much space they took up, not just in my bank account, in my mind. He leaned back in his chair. "Most people don't." I told him I'd restructured my finances, moved savings into a separate account, opened a credit monitoring alert, and scheduled time with a financial planner to talk about long-term goals. Not to fix anything, just to dream a little. He smiled when I said that. Not big, just enough. It was around that time I started saying yes to things again. Amelia invited me over for dinner one Friday night, just her and David. I brought dessert, a cherry pie from the bakery near my building. We sat around their table for hours, laughing, passing plates, telling stories I had forgotten I knew. Later that month, I joined a book club that met every other Wednesday at a cafe a few blocks from my place. The group was small, mostly women in their 40s and 60s. A few retired teachers, one woman named Sarah, who wore thick scarves and always brought a pencil tucked behind her ear. We talked about the books, but also about other things. How long winters feel, what we used to believe about love, how we learned to be alone without being lonely. I liked the pace of it. No one asked what I did for a living. No one needed anything from me. In our March session, Drs. Elias asked, "What do you feel when you picture your parents now?" I didn't answer right away. "Some sadness," I said. "Some relief, but mostly I feel distance, and I don't think that's bad." He nodded. Distance isn't the opposite of love. Sometimes it's the condition for healing. The next week, I heard through a mutual connection that my parents had started making changes. My father had taken on more real estate work, steady listings, not just big swings. My mother had increased her hours at the school. Charlotte had moved into a smaller apartment and was working 2 jobs. They were scaling back, making adjustments. The news brought a strange mix of emotions, not triumph, not exactly sorrow either. "They're doing what they should have been doing for years," I said to Dr. Elias. He nodded again. "And you're doing what you need to do now." That week, I deleted the folder. The one with the screenshots, the transactions, the videos. I'd backed it up, but I didn't need it in my daily line of sight anymore. In early April, I received a letter. It was addressed by hand, the writing unmistakable. My mother's always neat, with small loops on every Y. 3 pages folded carefully. It started gently. Sharon said they never meant to take advantage, that they thought they were just sharing as a family, that my success belonged to all of them in a way. There was no mention of the party, no acknowledgement of the deception. Toward the end, she wrote, "We just need a little help until we're back on our feet." I read the letter twice, folded it again, and placed it in a drawer. At my next therapy session, I brought it with me, reading parts of it out loud. "After I finished, Doctor," Elias said, "you don't need to respond to the version of the story they're still telling." "I almost sent money," I admitted. "But you didn't," he said. "What stopped you?" I thought for a moment. I realized I don't have to play the role they've written for me anymore. He didn't write anything down this time, just nodded. "That's not just self-protection," he said quietly. "That's growth." The snow began to melt by mid-April. Sidewalks cleared, the days lengthened. I bought a new set of dishes, ones I liked, not ones chosen to match a guest list that never came. I signed up for a weekend photography workshop near the lake. I took a Saturday train up to the shoreline and read on a bench in the sun without checking my phone once. Each day, the space between who I had been and who I was becoming grew just a little wider. I still thought of them. I didn't shut the door, but I didn't wait for them to knock either. By the time April ended, the calls had almost completely stopped. I still checked my voicemail once a week, out of habit more than hope, but the last few messages were from numbers I didn't recognize. The silence wasn't empty. It had weight to it, but it was a different kind of weight than before, something I could carry. Spring arrived slowly in Chicago. The air lost its bite, and the trees along the sidewalks began to bloom. I kept up with the book club. Amelia and I took long walks on Sunday afternoons, sometimes with coffee, sometimes with no plan at all. I noticed I had more energy at work. I wasn't keeping one eye on my phone anymore. It was early May when I made the final changes to my accounts. I'd held off on one last thing, closing the joint credit card I'd once opened for emergencies. I'd removed my parents as authorized users months earlier, but the account itself still sat there like a door left cracked open. That morning, I sat at my desk with a fresh cup of coffee. I logged in, reviewed the balance, 0, and closed it. Then I updated my passwords again, changed my login security questions, called the last of the institutions where my parents' names had ever been listed as contacts, and made sure it was all cleared out. It took maybe an hour. But when I shut my laptop, something shifted. Not a dramatic moment, just stillness. That afternoon, I met with my attorney for a follow-up. She went over everything carefully. Accounts, property, digital access points. "You've done the hard part," my attorney said. "Now it's about protecting the space you've created." She paused and added, "You've got it secured. If anything changes, you know where to reach me." That night, I walked home instead of taking the train. It was warm enough to leave my jacket open. A breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass from a nearby park. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't checking behind me. The next day, I was halfway through a staff meeting when my phone buzzed. I didn't look right away, but after the meeting ended, I glanced down. Private number, voicemail. I tapped play and listened. It was my uncle's voice, Leonard's brother. They hadn't spoken in years. "Isabella, your father's trying to reach you. He's worried." They're in a bit of a situation, and he thought maybe you'd at least talk. He left a number. I didn't call back. Instead, I brought it up with Dr. Elias that week. Was it hard to ignore? He asked. No, I said. Not this time. We talked about what had changed, how the fear of being seen as the bad daughter had lost its grip, how I had started to see that protecting myself didn't mean harming anyone else. You've dismantled the old dynamic, he said. Now you're building something new. He was right, but I wasn't doing it alone. My friendships had deepened. Sarah from the book club had become a close friend. We met for brunch once a week at a little diner with chipped mugs and the best sourdough toast in the city. Sarah was older, 65, and had been through something similar with her own family years ago. One Sunday morning over coffee and eggs, I asked her, "Does the guilt ever go away completely?" Sarah thought for a while, then said, "No, it just gets quieter. It moves from a voice in your ear to a memory in your pocket. You still carry it. You just stop letting it drive." I thought about that for days afterward. I also kept volunteering at the Financial Literacy Center downtown once a week, helping people figure out how to build credit, make budgets, get out from under debt. It was quiet work, not flashy, but it mattered. One Wednesday evening, I helped a young woman who reminded me a little of Charlotte. She had a stack of bills and a look on her face like she hadn't breathed in days. We sat side by side. I showed her how to organize everything, helped her write a script to call a lender, even printed out a sample budget. At the end, the young woman looked up and said, "You make it feel like I can actually fix this." She didn't know how much I understood. That night, I walked home under a sky still holding the last light of day. The street lamps were just starting to flicker on. My building came into view, familiar and safe. I let myself in, dropped my bag by the door, and stood for a minute in the stillness of my apartment. This was my space, my life, not something I built to accommodate anyone else. I wasn't waiting for the phone to ring. I wasn't budgeting for someone else's mistake. And I wasn't trying to be the daughter who made everything better anymore. Summer came early that year. Chicago bloomed faster than usual, like it had somewhere to be. I was sitting on my balcony one evening in June, the sky soft with sunset, and iced coffee sweating on the table beside me. My plants were doing better than I expected. So was I. It had been 6 months since Christmas. The silence from my family had stretched out long enough to become normal. I still thought about them quietly, like you think of an old house you once lived in. But I didn't check for messages anymore. I didn't expect anything. That week, Dr. Elias and I moved our sessions from weekly to every other week. We still talked through things, but it was different now. Less about crisis, more about patterns, history, what I had carried and why. He once said, "When money becomes the currency of connection, everything gets distorted." It's not just about dollars, it's about love measured in transactions. It stayed with me. I'd started looking at the past through a different lens. How birthdays were always about what I could give. How holidays felt like performances. How gratitude had always come wrapped in obligation. I also kept building new things, new routines, new relationships. I'd repainted the hallway in my condo, changed out the old rug I'd bought with company in mind. Now everything in my home reflected me. Not them, not what they needed, just what made sense in this chapter. On the last Saturday of June, Amelia hosted a rooftop barbecue. Just a few friends, some of whom I had only met once or twice. Amelia's partner, David, grilled. Sarah brought her peach cobbler. Josh played guitar. People laughed. Someone passed around sparkling lemonade in mason jars. We ate outside until the string lights blinked on overhead and the city softened beneath us. Nobody asked me to pay for anything. Nobody hinted at favors. No one looked at me like I owed them something just for being there. I stayed later than I meant to. That night back home, I stood in front of the mirror and barely recognized the version of myself who had once waited for every text from my parents to decide what she was allowed to feel. The next morning, my building security desk called. "Miss Stone, there's a Leonard Stone here asking to see you." I didn't say anything at first. "He says he's your father. He's waiting in the atrium." "I'll come down," I said after a long pause. "But please let him know we'll talk in the public area only." "Yes, ma'am." I hung up, took a breath, put on a clean blouse, pulled my hair back. Then I grabbed the card from my side drawer. "Doctor." Elias's, the one with a note I'd written on the back weeks ago, just in case. The elevator ride felt longer than usual. My father stood near the window, hands in his pockets. He looked older, not just tired, smaller somehow. The suit he wore had once fit him well. Now the sleeves bunched slightly at the wrist. He turned when he saw me. "Isabella," he said, like it was a relief. I gave a small nod. "Hi, Dad." He stepped forward, then hesitated. He reached out his hand instead of going for a hug. I shook it briefly. "You look well," he said. "Thank you. What brings you here?" He sighed a familiar kind of sigh, performed but practiced. "Can't a father want to see his daughter?" "Your mother's been so worried." "I'm fine," I said. "You can see that. Was there something specific you needed?" He looked away, then back. His voice changed, lower, flatter. "We made a mistake at Christmas. We should have told you about the party." "But is that really enough to throw away your whole family?" I didn't move. "You've apologized?" I asked. He blinked. "I just did." "No, you said you should have told me. That's not the same as acknowledging what happened." His jaw tightened. "We didn't mean to hurt you." "But you did." He shifted like the floor had gotten uncomfortable beneath him. He tried again. "It wasn't like we planned to." "I watched the video, Dad." "I heard what you said, what Charlotte said." He opened his mouth, then closed it, looked at the floor. "This isn't easy for us," he said quietly. I nodded. "I'm sure it's not." He reached into his inside pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "The bank's threatening foreclosure. We're behind. We need $27,000 to get current. I didn't want to ask this way, but we don't have anywhere else to turn." He held the paper out, but I didn't take it. I let the pause stretch. "I'm sorry you're in that situation," I said, "but I can't help with that. Not anymore." He blinked at me. "After everything we've done for you?" I kept my voice steady. "This is me setting boundaries. I won't be your bank anymore." He looked stunned, then angry, then tired. I reached into my pocket and handed him the card. He stared down at it. "That's my therapist. His name is Dr. Elias. If you and Mom ever want to rebuild a relationship without money involved, that would be a place to start." He turned the card over. My handwriting was on the back. "I love you both," I said quietly. "But I won't go back to the way things were." He slipped the card into his pocket. "Your mother won't understand this." "I hope one day she will." We stood there for another moment. Then he nodded, stepped away, and walked toward the exit. I stayed where I was, letting the quiet settle around me. I watched the door close behind him. I stayed in the building's atrium for a few minutes after my dad left. The air felt cooler once he was gone. People passed by, heading to meetings, sipping coffee, talking quietly, and I sat still, my fingers resting on the chair's arm, my back upright. It wasn't relief exactly, but it was peace. That evening, I walked 2 blocks to Amelia's. She and David were grilling again, something simple, just chicken and corn. Sarah came too, bringing a pasta salad with lemon and dill. The five of us ate on their rooftop deck, watching the sun lower over the skyline, city windows flickering on one by one. Josh brought his guitar again. His husband, Michael, told stories that made all of us laugh until we were wiping our eyes. No one asked about my parents. No one brought up money. I stayed until the sky went deep blue and the breeze picked up off the lake. After I got home, I changed into comfortable clothes, washed the dishes in my sink, and sat on my couch with a book I didn't read. I kept thinking about that moment in the atrium, his hand out, not to connect, but to collect. The next day, I called Dr. Elias and left a message asking if he had any openings that week. He called back just after lunch. We met the next evening. I told him everything, what my dad said, what he didn't say, how he tried to frame it as a misunderstanding, how the apology had never come. Dr. Elias didn't interrupt. When I finished, he said, "You honored your boundary with clarity and without cruelty. That's a turning point." I nodded. We sat quietly for a moment before I added, "I didn't feel angry, just steady." "That's the result of months of doing the work," he said. You responded from a place of strength, not fear. We spent the rest of the session exploring how to keep that strength anchored, especially if things stirred up again. They didn't. 2 weeks passed, then a third. No more visits, no letters. No late-night voicemails. In their silence, something else took shape. The weekend before the 4th of July, I hosted my own small gathering. Just Amelia and David, Sarah and 2 colleagues from work I'd gotten close with. I made lemonade with fresh mint, grilled skewers on a borrowed tabletop grill, and set out cushions on the balcony floor. We listened to music, passed around homemade peach cobbler, watched fireworks blooming over the lake, their reflection coloring the tops of buildings. Later, when the plates were cleared and everyone had headed home, I stood barefoot on my balcony, a light breeze moving the curtain behind me. I looked out at the neighborhood I'd lived in for years. But now, for the first time, it really felt like mine. Inside the apartment was quiet, clean, steady. Every item in its place. No unopened letters, no unpaid favors hanging over me. Just one night lived fully. In therapy that week, I talked about it. Dr. Elias listened as I described the gathering, the food, the sound of the laughter. Then I told him the part I hadn't shared yet. "I didn't feel like I had to earn it," I said. "I didn't host to prove anything. I just wanted to enjoy it." He smiled. "That's what belonging feels like." And it starts with giving yourself permission to live differently. We talked more about chosen family, about what it means to rebuild a life that reflects who you are, not who others need you to be. I told him about Sarah's words from weeks earlier. The idea that guilt never fully leaves, it just stops leading. He nodded slowly. "You've stopped negotiating with the guilt. That's why it doesn't have the same power." Summer continued, mornings with the windows open, afternoons spent reading in the park, evenings filled with dinners, phone calls with friends, walks down quiet streets. I still thought about my parents sometimes, about Charlotte. I wondered if they'd seen the silence as punishment or as space. But I didn't reach out. The difference now was simple. I no longer waited for them to change in order to move forward with my life. I kept the card I gave my father on my desk just in case. I never heard whether they contacted Dr. Elias, but that wasn't mine to manage anymore. As fall settled over Chicago, I found myself moving slower, not out of hesitation, but something else. Contentment, maybe. The air had that crispness I always love, the kind that made you want to wrap your hands around a warm mug and sit a little longer near a window. I hadn't spoken to my parents since that afternoon in the atrium. Charlotte stayed quiet too, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel caught between guilt and duty. I felt free. The holidays crept closer. Amelia asked what my plans were. Sarah offered to host a quiet gathering. There were invitations from work friends, neighbors, even a woman from my book club who ran a Christmas morning volunteer shift at a shelter. I didn't say yes to everything. I didn't say no out of obligation. I simply chose what felt right. Christmas morning, I got up early. No rushing, no deadlines. I made coffee, pulled on a sweater, and headed out to volunteer at the community dinner. We served ham and sweet potatoes, handed out coats, listened to someone's grandson play the piano with cold, careful fingers. When I looked around, I saw warmth that had nothing to do with money, people laughing softly, eyes meeting over shared plates, strangers who made room at the table without needing to be asked. Later that day, I hosted a few friends in my condo. We kept it simple: soup, fresh bread, wine, a few cookies we'd each brought from home. There were no elaborate decorations, no staged photos, just voices rising and falling over candlelight. Just enough chairs, just enough heart. And that night, I bundled up and walked to the park for the outdoor concert Sarah had told me about. A quartet played under the shelter as bundled-up families gathered with thermoses and folding chairs. I stood near the back with a cup of mulled cider, watching the lights twinkle through bare tree branches. It wasn't the Christmas I used to dream about. It was something better, honest, earned, quiet in all the right places. I still thought about them, my parents, Charlotte. I wondered if they'd found their footing. I hoped they were safe. I didn't wish them harm, but I no longer lived on hold, waiting for things to become what they'd never been. That's what healing turned out to be. Not erasing the past, but letting go of its grip. Not pretending there was no pain, but deciding not to carry it forward. The most important thing I learned is this: real love does not come with a receipt. It doesn't keep score, and it doesn't disguise itself as sacrifice when it's really control. Family can be a beautiful thing, but sometimes the most loving act is stepping away from what's broken and building something new.